I'm Sergeant Keys from the Senior NCOA Curriculum Team, and in this video we're going to be going over effective onboarding and training in organizations in the leadership module. So this lesson is one of the longer ones. It is 6.5 hours long, or 390 minutes. Of course, like all leadership lessons, this one directly relates to the outcome that we're looking for, which is anticipate and direct transitions that lead to more effective, agile, and lethal organizations. And when it comes to both being effective and agile, I think you'll see that this lesson does a really good job of scaffolding up to that outcome. Because by the end, students are going to be able to do these 4 things. Describe effective onboarding practices that promote a sense of self-worth and motivation in new arrivals. Design an effective onboarding process tailored to military unit needs that promotes agility and or lethality. They're going to discuss best practices in training programs that capitalize on the KSAs of new arrivals, or knowledge, skills, and abilities. And finally, they're going to explain the role of senior NCOs in building and maintaining effective onboarding and training programs. For required instructor resources, there's only a few different articles that we need you to read. So these 3 articles here. And then finally, this AFI, specifically Chapter 3, in processing requirements. So we didn't know this until we started building this module, but there's an actual AFI out there that has your actual no-kidding requirements that you need as far as in processing goes. And so how are you going to build an onboarding process if you don't know that, right? No additional instructor resources needed, and no materials needed for this lesson outside of what you normally have in your flight room. 390 minutes is the hard target you have to hit for this lesson. So as long as you get through everything in that amount of time, you are good to go. So to start for this introduction, what we're going to do is we're going to send we're going to send the class to watch this YouTube video together. And it's a video of the airmen at Air Force Basic Training saying the Airman's Creed when they become airmen and get their airman's coin. It's at that ceremony. So what you're going to do is you're going to play that video. It's like a minute long, super quick. And after they say, "I will not fail," you're going to pause the video and you're going to ask the students, like, you're going to pause it and say, okay, how do they feel right now in this moment? How do these airmen feel? And their answers from the students should center on things like they have a lot of pride, they're very happy, they're incredibly motivated, they're committed, all of these great things, right, that new airmen should feel at basic training. And so what we have here is we say, okay, that's great, right? So if at the end of BMT, airmen are hyper motivated and proud to be in the Air Force, but if you talk to those same airmen some years down the line, that motivation is often eroded or it's gone altogether. And so we say that the purpose of this lesson is to examine how senior NCOs can leverage seemingly routine processes like onboarding or training to capitalize on airmen's motivation and build a sense of belonging, ultimately building more effective, agile, and lethal organizations. Again, that pulled straight from the outcome for leadership. So by the end, students are going to be able to do all 4 of these things, and you're going to relate that to their overall outcome project, right? That they're going to examine how the onboarding and training processes look back home in their home organizations, and how good a job do those processes do at building motivation and a sense of self-worth in new arrivals. So for the first main point, what you're going to do is you're going to have the students just take about 30 minutes and you're going to use this to recall information that they already have on onboarding. And so what you're going to ask them is, when a new person arrives at your unit back home, what does onboarding look like? Is there like a checklist that they're given? Is there meetings they have to attend? Is there a base tour that they go on? Like, what does onboarding look like? So give them a few minutes to write down their answers on their own. And you really do want them to write down and brainstorm, because they're going to use those answers at the next part of this main point. So after they write down some items, just throw it out to the class. Hey, why don't you guys share your answers? And have a few students just kind of share what they wrote down. And after that, what you're going to do is you're going to have the students look at what they wrote down and consider these questions that we're going to ask. You just want them to reflect. So don't start a whole class-wide discussion on this. So you're going to ask them, hey, when does the onboarding process begin? Does the process solicit the inbound person's thoughts or ideas? Is the new member introduced to the vision of the organization? Is the onboarding process one way, or is it interactive? And what parts, if any, of the onboarding process help the member feel valued as an individual as opposed to a number? and is someone guiding them through this process. And so you just want these, what I would do is put these up on a slide, just all 5 or 6 of these questions, put them up on a slide, have the students look at these questions, and then look at what they wrote down. At this point, you're just getting you're just priming the pump in their mind for them to start thinking about what's going on back home. And so you're not saying what they're doing is right or wrong. You just want them to start investigating what's happening back home. And so then you let them know, hey, since innovation requires individuals to invest themselves in our units, how can we expect our new members to invest in us if we don't invest in them as individuals from the time they arrive on station? And so we put something here like, let's examine how we can make new arrivals feel valued and capitalize on their motivation from the beginning of their tour. And so you'll play this video from Chief Skibitsky, who at this point, at the time of recording this video, is the command chief of Cannon Air Force Base. And so if you don't know about Cannon, Cannon doesn't have a really good rap as far as being one of the most desired places to be stationed. And I'll leave it at that. And so Chief Skibitsky put a video out there to address that and get ahead of it. And so it's a video where she kind of talks about what her priorities are as far as what she wants to invest in people-wise at Cannon Air Force Base, and just talks about, how good it can really be in the family atmosphere she wants to cultivate there. So it's a really good video to watch if you get an assignment there before you've even arrived. And so the idea is you watch this and then just ask the students these questions. Where would this video fall within the onboarding process? And the answer should be the beginning. And we say that right here. Before a member even arrives to the base. How could this video make a newly assigned member feel like part of the organization before they arrive? What are other things we can we can do to make people feel welcome before their arrival? And how do you know if these efforts are successful? So we can do all sorts of stuff, right? You can send an email to them. You can give them a phone call. There's a number of things you could do to make them feel welcome before they even arrive. But this is a great question right here. How do we know if that's a successful thing to do? Do we need to keep doing it if it's not successful? So there's not a right or wrong answer here, but the students should have some measurement of success. And if they don't, that's a great point for them too, to consider, we've been doing these things, but we don't even know if they're successful or not back home. And when should onboarding begin? And when should it end? There are some people who would say it begins the moment you get your assignment rip. There are some people who say it's the moment you arrive at the unit. Some people will say it never ends. Some people will say it ends once you meet your supervisor and you're dropped off at your shop. So you'll probably get a lot of different answers to this. Main point 2, and the reason why this lesson is so long is because this is 180 minutes long. This is a 3-hour project that they're going to be working on in class. So divide the room up into 3 or 4 groups and assign them these tasks. So step 1, they are going to research the most effective onboarding practices that are out there by answering these questions. They have to cite sources for all these answers. So step 1, they're just looking out there in the world, not even necessarily military onboarding processes, but just organizational onboarding. What are the best practices that are out there? So the first thing they need to do is answer all these questions and get some good research done. Once that's done and they have all of this information in their hip pocket, now they're going to take all that information and use it to craft the ideal onboarding process for an Air Force unit. The difference is they're going to use all that information and address some of these military specific items as well. So we even say address all the items in step 1 as well as some of these things, right? So what military specific items, training, resources would they include? This is a great one here, and don't lose sight of this. How would their ideal training onboarding process meet or exceed the requirements outlined in this AFI chapter 3? So they actually have to dive into this AFI and explain how it meets or exceeds those requirements. What we don't want them to do is just come up with some onboarding process that's not realistic and doesn't actually meet any of the requirements that bases need. So while they're researching up here in step 1 for the most effective onboarding practices, in step 2, because we put this here, they are going to have to dive into this AFI and make sure that what they're doing is realistic. This is a great question down here. How do both the airmen and the unit benefit from this ideal state onboarding process? So you don't want to create a process that's just fantastic for the airmen, but not realistic and ideal for a unit. How do you balance both of those? And finally, what role does the senior NCO play in this entire process? Where do they fit in, and how can they ensure that the process is running smoothly? So it's a lot of work to do all of this stuff. and create a presentation that's at least 15 minutes in length, but no more than 20 minutes each. They have to use visual aids. They have to address all items from step 1 and step 2. It's a lot of work. That's why it's 3 hours long. It's almost half their day of education. We don't give them any sources here to start off with. In a lot of lessons we do, we gave you sources at the beginning just to help you get primed for this lesson, right? We did it for them because if you just Google like effective onboarding practices or best onboarding practices or whatever, there is so much out there that we decided we would be doing the students a disservice if we just gave them specific sources to use because they would just hone in on those. There are if you do like Google search results, there are pages and pages and pages of legitimate, great answers to all of these questions. And so we want the students to go out there and research and find whatever they can find on their own, which is why we did not give them a starting point for where to do their research here. So that is intentional. Main point 3, super easy. They are going to just present what their ideal onboarding process looks like. Main point 4, we're going to watch this video of why do we need to treat our employees as thoughtfully as our customers. So it's a 45-minute main point. It's because the video is pretty long. I think it's like 15 or 20 minutes long, maybe even longer. And they talk about pain points in this video. They talk about pain points for customers that companies go out there and try to identify all the pain points that a customer has to go through to purchase something at their company and then eliminate those pain points so that customers have a very smooth way to go spend money at this company. And what they talk about in the TED Talk is we never look at what the employees need to do and try to eliminate pain points for them so they can make an even better product or do an even better job in the organization. And so the first thing you're going to ask them is reflecting back on the research they conducted in that 3-hour project. What were some common pain points they discovered within onboarding processes? What did they learn about how onboarding can help members feel valued and motivated upon arrival? And then finally, this is a great one to really wrap it back up to the beginning of the whole lesson. We're going to say, hey, you talked about the ideal state, right? You got to create your ideal state of onboarding. Now think back to the list you made of what your unit's currently doing. Where's there room for improvement? And what could you personally do to make those improvements come to life? That should be a really good conversation piece right here. If there's one question that I expect there to be a lot of good conversation, it's this right here. This is like the aha moment where they link all this great research they did and all these presentations they watched from what their peers saw as the ideal state of onboarding to their no kidding real units back home. And so this is where they should start to formulate, oh yeah, here's what we could be doing better back home. So I expect this question to be a really good conversation piece. So finally, we're going to link it to training processes as well. So we understand that training managers and other people in the units own the training process. So we're not asking them to take on like their responsibilities and cross into their lanes. But senior NCOs can exert some influence into how processes are done across the unit to include training. And so this is just a very quick main point. We say, hey, what concepts that we researched today could also apply to unit training programs? How can it enhance the training process? What are common pain points you've seen in training programs and how can you eliminate them? And so this last one's a really good one. New arrivals will often say, hey, my last unit, we did this, and in my last unit, we did that. So first we say, hey, why do trainers or supervisors get annoyed when new arrivals say that phrase? And we're kind of setting the students up here because they're going to have answers like, well, because they can't break away from their old unit. They can't change the way things are being done here. But then we ask them down here, we kind of flip the table on them. We say, okay, but is there value? Is there value in asking them, hey, how did you do stuff at your previous duty location? Why do we shirk away from that? Why are we not thinking to ourselves, wow, they keep talking about their last unit. Maybe their last unit did something really right and we can learn from them and gain best practices. And so just a conversation piece to have as far as how onboarding and training units. Finally, conclusion, very easy. Just summarize the concepts discussed for the day. And of course, have students provide feedback to one another on the quality of their presentations as it relates to the learning objectives. Again, you can do one-on-one feedback, group-to-group feedback. It doesn't really matter. As long as the students are providing feedback to one another on how everything went today as it relates to these learning objectives, you've met the intent of the conclusion. So that is it. That is the 6.5 hour lesson on effective onboarding and training in organizations.